Well, it's a great pleasure to be part of the Recovery Summit. And it's a pleasure for me also to have the opportunity to share a few thoughts with none other than David Coulthard, 13 times Formula One Grand Prix winner. Now, we have worked together very closely for a number of years, and we normally are talking to organizations about leadership, about teamwork, about change and transformation, about innovation and technology. But none of us have experienced anything like what we have seen in recent months with the COVID-19 crisis. And of course, it's had a huge impact, not just on us as individuals, but on our whole industry, with Formula One grinding to a standstill and not actually yet taking place in 2020. So David, just to get the ball rolling, how have you been coping with the COVID-19 shutdown in recent weeks?
Well, I suspect, like for you, Mark, and for many of our colleagues that are associated with the world of sport and international business, and many of the people that will be watching this today, to suddenly find yourself having to socially distance, not travel, not to eyeball your partners in business and those that you're trying to develop business with going forward has been only possible because of this global lockdown. Because quite frankly, if it was left for us to make a judgment, then the majority would have judged to keep going. But it's shown that, as well as all the negatives, of course, and the tragedies out there, if we as humans continue to do what we do best, which is focus on the here and now, focus on the future, then it's been a great opportunity to regroup as a family and really understand where the opportunities lie going forward.
Now, you mentioned regrouping as a family. I was trying to work out, it must be 30 years since you stayed in one place for 10 weeks at a time and didn't get on a plane to go somewhere. Really, for you personally, has that been a negative experience, or has been regrouping with the family actually an unexpected silver lining to the COVID crisis?
Yeah, my wife has mentioned a couple of times in the 15 years that we've been together, this is by far and away the longest uninterrupted period of time. But it's been a pleasure. It's been really, really enjoyable for me. And I think being a Scottish village boy, I spent a large part of my childhood wandering around a village with not a great deal to do. So in terms of having quite a vivid imagination and be able to put that to good use, even if I can't physically be somewhere, has served me well in this situation of not being able to travel. So far so good, but I am very much looking forward to getting back out there into the world of commerce.
Now we're going to talk about the return to business, and in our case, the return to Formula One motor racing. But let's just back up a little bit and talk about the fact that everyone's been through an unprecedented challenge, really something that none of us have experienced in our lives before. But yet, I think we've all experienced personal challenges during the course of our lives. For you as a person and as a highly successful sports star, what have been the moments in your life where you've really faced a major, challenge that's forced you to question the future and how you can get through it?
Well, if I actually look through the journey from karting in Scotland to being a Grand Prix driver for 15 seasons, traveling the world, even before I got to Formula One, of course, I was just one of thousands of hopefuls, men and women around the world that thought they had the talent to race in Formula One. And some with more talent than I didn't even get there because they didn't get the opportunity, or when they were faced with adversity, they decided to pack up and head home. I faced something similar a couple of years before I made it to Formula One, where my family had supported me for more than a decade through the lower formulas. And it got to the point where my father and mother said, son, we cannot financially support you any further. You have an older brother, you have a younger sister. We've given it our best shot. You're kind of on your own. And that was the sort of waking up moment of, becoming a man in its fullest sense, I think, where I realized I didn't have that comfort of always being able to, lean on my father's advice or my mother's support. I had to get out in front of people, look them in the eye. And I believed I had the talent. I believed I had the commitment. But you've got to show people that. And how often in life do we hear people saying, oh, I'm waiting on someone getting back to me? Well, what I learned at that point is I didn't wait for anyone to get back to me because I don't think they would have. I got in my car and I drove to them and knocked on their door. As long as you're not being offensive, in the way you approach somebody, getting yourself in front of someone and giving them the opportunity to then see you and to hear you, I think was a real opportunity for me to understand what true commitment was. If I can briefly also touch on another really difficult moment, was in 2000. So I'm 5-6 years into my Formula One career, and I was in a plane crash. The aircraft that I chartered to fly from England to France had an engine failure. We did a single engine landing, and sadly, the result of that was a crash on landing, and the pilots were both killed. And that was on the Tuesday before the Spanish Grand Prix. Now, as you can probably imagine, I wasn't really keen on flying very much after that, but I had a decision to make. I drove back that night, having been cleared from the medical facilities at Lyon Airport. I drove back to Monte Carlo, which is my home base. And then come Thursday, I had to get an aircraft to fly to the next race, which was the Spanish Grand Prix. I could have driven, but I felt I needed to make that step. I needed to get back on a plane, and I needed to get back to the racetrack to really get the fear, if you like, the fear of death out of my mind. And I finished second in that Grand Prix with the support of the families of the pilots. And in their honour, I picked up that trophy.
Now, I remember that very well, because it was such obviously a momentous thing in your life, a huge trauma, frankly, in your life. And I believe you actually spoke, I think, to the father of one of the pilots ahead of that weekend. And I think there's something in there, isn't there, about confronting the detail of the drama that you're going through. I mean, you could have tried to brush it all under the carpet, but you very much focused on taking head on the challenge of what's involved here, not just for you, but for the other people that were affected by it.
Well, I think that's very important. And that's a life lesson that I think has been instilled into me by my family. We have a transport business, which was started in 1916. My brother runs that business today, but it's been passed from generation to generation on the understanding about what is customer service, how do you deliver customer service, and what I believe and what I've been taught, and how you deal with things and moments of adversity. It's not how people deal with things when everything's perfect, when everything's going well. It's when you hit difficult moments. It's when you have those really tough conversations. It's tackling them head on. It's looking people in the eye and saying, I know I can't tell you not to take this personally, because what I'm about to say will be personal to you because it's about you. But this is how I feel. This is where I feel that it isn't working, and whatever the relationship is. And this is what I'm going to do as a result of that. If you tackle these things head on with honesty and sincerity, and not just, as you say, trying to brush them under the carpet, I have found, and I believe most people would find, that it's not anywhere near as painful as you may have imagined. And it's just so much more respectful, and enables you, I think, to build a team spirit and a respect in the people that you have worked with and maybe are going to work with in the future.
Now, talking about those personal moments of adversity that you've had to face during your personal and professional career, let's talk about the effect on a team of people whenever there is a dramatic event, because I think COVID-19 for most business people, it's affected whole organizations. And whether you run a small business with 10 employees or whether you run a multinational company with 50,000 employees, the coronavirus crisis will have affected companies in every conceivable way and created a lot of questions about the future. Now, I was thinking earlier today that obviously your Formula One career began as a racing driver in the wake of the fatality of Ayrton Senna. So he was killed while leading the San Marino Grand Prix in 1994. You were the Williams Formula One test driver. You drove for Ayrton's team. You'd been a test driver for him and his teammate, Damon Hill. And then you found yourself parachuted in, your Formula One career starting with the Williams team in the wake of that tragic event. You must have found a team in a state of some disarray. And what do you think were the key ingredients in pulling that team back together again at what was a very difficult time for all of them?
Well, I think the key thing that I have experienced during my time in Formula One, and I assume that all top-line sport is the same, and as you know, Mark, because you've been involved all the way through in the business side, you know, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in team ownership, and the likes, what brings us all together is a common goal and focus and desire to want to succeed. We want to compete. and we want to win. And when you bring together a group of individuals who, whatever their talent level is, but they're all aligned in the common goal and desire, it then becomes so much easier. And it's an essential ingredient in successful sports teams, and I think in successful businesses, that suddenly the friction goes out of any of the decisions. And whether those decisions are being taken through adversity, through the loss of the late, great Ayrton Senna, or whether it's an engineering decision or a day-to-day business decision, when people totally understand and are aligned with the management's vision of where the end goal is, suddenly people are almost making the decisions collectively and carrying the management along, rather than the classic sort of dictatorial, you're doing this and you're doing that. You know, I just have never lived and worked in an organization where people needed to be told what to do. I've lived and worked in Formula One teams where they actually understand, even before they come into work, what they need to do. And it's just a little bit of finessing and guidance from the leadership and the management. And under the guidance of Sir Frank Williams, who was the owner of the Williams Grand Prix team, he was very clear that Ayrton would have wanted to race on. He wanted to race on, and racing is what Williams do. And suddenly everyone collectively just gets on with the job. And the best way to honour anybody, whether they're leaving a company in retirement or in the case of Ayrton's death, is to continue to give 100%. You cannot honour anyone better than that.
Now, talking about organizations, you're an entrepreneur, you're a very successful entrepreneur. You've had a number of businesses that you've invested in during your life. And one that you're particularly proud of at the moment is Whisper, which is a very successful television media production company in the UK. Talk to us about the impact of COVID-19 on the people and the business there, and how you, along with your shareholders and the leadership, have tackled the challenge for your business.
Well, again, having great partners, my two partners in the business, Sunil Patel, Jake Humphrey, Sunil coming more from the production background. Jake is a television presenter, and I learned so much from him when I retired as a driver and then started working in sports broadcasting. But they both had the hunger and desire and the belief that television could be done better. And with the greatest respect to the BBC, which is, of course, an internationally recognized broadcast organization, who we were all working for from 2009. One of the difficulties, of course, in anyone who's representing a large company is the bigger you become, the more difficult the getting everyone aligned, getting everyone really feeling part of the team and the common goal becomes. So Whisper was born out of a belief that we could do sports television, which is the primary focus of Whisper TV. We're now branching out into branded and documentaries and what have you, because of course we naturally have a desire to grow. But our primary focus was on being the Formula One team of the broadcast industry. And that was, as I mentioned earlier, bringing together the right editors and cameramen and soundmen and women, to be correct, because we are actually predominantly women employees within our company, a very diverse company as well. And also, one of the things I'm most proud of is we were on schedule to be the host broadcaster for the Paralympics in Japan. That's now, of course, being delayed through into next year. But we have a number of very talented employees that live and deal with disability within the Whisper Group. So, to see the growth of a company and empowering people that my whole life in motor racing, I was surrounded by more intelligent, more creative people, but I was able to be the voice of the car. And today within Whisper, they're all much more talented than I, but sometimes I can ask a question which stimulates a thought that then they run with it. And it's just great to see how the business has grown on the strength of the people.
Let's move on to talking about the impact of COVID-19 on our industry, on Formula One. So essentially, Formula One as a sport has ground to a complete halt as a result of the coronavirus crisis. The very first Grand Prix of the season in Australia was cancelled at the last moment, and we haven't had any racing in March, April, May or June, but we are set to return in July. It's fair to say that Formula One in its 70-year history has never witnessed anything of this scale in terms of disruption.
Well, I think not only Formula One, but all sports have been affected around the world. And what I think it's done is reaffirmed the public's desire to have that tribal moment and support their favorite football team or their favorite basketball team or their favorite Formula One team. And I think that is why sport is already starting to come back as we speak. Formula One will be back on track in July. It's a truly global business, which just happens to be the sport of motor racing and the sport of Formula One. And as you say, the 70 years of the Formula One World Championship, we've seen incredible growth. This will be not a growth year. We will have less Grand Prix, so targeting 15 Grand Prix from a scheduled 21. There'll be knock-on effects on broadcast contracts and sponsorship contracts, partnership contracts, which will see the revenues decrease for the owners, which are Liberty Media. But I think everybody who is watching this is going through a similar challenge. But it's about how you come forward, how you come out of this, how do you strengthen in the areas. And I think that we've seen, and one of the things we've obviously spoken about, Mark, offline of this conversation, is the growth of online communications and the need to really embrace a new way of working and how you connect with your customers and your consumers. And in our case, how do we connect with the racing fans?
Now, in Formula One's case, of course, it pivoted very quickly to having an online virtual Formula One World Championship. Now, the world of eSports has been around for well over a decade, but it's really accelerated during the last couple of months. We see Ferrari's lead driver, Charles Leclerc, racing online. We see Max Verstappen, your colleague at Red Bull Racing, races online too. Lots of Formula One drivers out there doing their thing. And you... and I'm sure the audience, you won't mind me saying, I mean, you're a more mature driver these days. Esports wouldn't be your natural territory, but you've got involved in that as well. And you've worked with some of your ambassador partners to commercial ambassador partnerships to put on online content. And you competed against, for example, Nico Rosberg, which I watched with great interest online. So it's really been quite a profound change for everybody to deliver the whole experience of motorsport as an online consumption for fans.
Well, you mentioned Nico Rosberg, who is a former world champion in Formula One, but also in that event that was organised by Heineken. Other great beer brands are available, but Heineken are a global partner of Formula One, and I have an ambassadorial relationship with them. And they also had Roberto Carlos, a fantastically talented Brazilian footballer, who was very quick, it has to be said, when it came to driving in the virtual world. So yeah, that's not the domain in which I grew up. And I had to take a great deal of advice and guidance from my 11-year-old son, who is completely immersed and completely familiar with the esports world and how to take your physical feeling out of the driving experience. Because of course, a lot of what you do in a race car is seat of the pants. Visual stimulation, and then it's what you feel through your back and through your hands. But what is fantastic to see with this younger generation and the professional e-gamers is that they can operate completely on visual cues. And I think in that respect, what we've learned through the lockdown is that motor racing, and particularly Formula One, and you mentioned Charles Leclerc, who is the great hope future for Ferrari Formula One team, it's as close as you're ever going to get to the real thing, which you can't replicate in football. You know, FIFA football, you play with your fingers on the games console. Or, you know, virtual golf, you can do it against the screen. But in actual fact, of course, in the simulation of driving, you have this physical steering wheel, you have the pedals, you have the visual cues and incredible graphics nowadays. So it really does put you in the cockpit.
Now, is there a lesson here for all of us in business who are, I mean, generally the leadership teams in most companies are people in their, on the far side of 35, maybe into their 40s, 50s, 60s even. Is there something to be learned here from your experience? Your son, Dayton, is able to tell you about the online domain and how things work. There's a lot of debate around the fact that maybe businesses need to learn from those younger audiences and actually turn to their younger employees to say, how do we deliver the online experience?
This is a key thing that sport teaches us. And a lot of business just doesn't listen to this, despite a lot of those businesses being sports fans, you know, the individuals within the business. If you go through the history of whatever your favorite sport is, whether it's tennis with Boris Becker winning Wimbledon at 16, whether it's soccer with Ronaldo scoring for the first team at 17, Max Verstappen winning in Formula One as the youngest ever Grand Prix driver, started in Formula One at 17 before he had a driving license for the road. We accept in sport that talent, if you're good enough, you're old enough. Yet in business, we still tend to go, well, he doesn't have the experience or she doesn't have the experience. If they've got the talent, they actually can be leads, even if they don't have the years of classic business experience. If they've got the vision and the raw skills to take that department forward, I would follow any man, any woman of any age if I can see and feel that they have passion and energy for that role. And I think that's the one key learning that, again, this lockdown, as we've become more comfortable with screen time and more comfortable with the things that maybe historically our parents would have said. My grandmother used to call the television the idiot box. Anyone who sat there watching a television, wasn't learning anything. But of course, we know that television or computers, the internet today, is a great source of learning.
Now, Formula One is going to kick off at the beginning of July in Austria. There are going to be 2 races in Austria. We then go to Hungary, and then we have 2 races at Silverstone, the home of British motor racing. You're president of the British Racing Drivers Club, which owns Silverstone. Those events are going to take place without any spectators, and the Formula One teams are going to be taking about half the number of personnel, and they're going to be sticking rigidly to social distancing and protective measures. It's going to be a very strange experience for the industry, but also for you, David, because you're going to be commentating remotely, isn't that right?
Yeah, part of the Channel 4 broadcast, which is one of the UK broadcast channels. We won't be at the physical Grand Prix. So our intention is to broadcast from Silverstone. So the first Grand Prix, as you mentioned, at the Red Bull Ring in Austria, but we will be at the Heritage Centre at Silverstone, surrounded by so much history of Formula One, and that will be our backdrop as we add the topping and tailing to the main commentary of the Grand Prix as it unfolds. It won't change, of course, the driver experience for the race itself. Whether they have crowd or not, will still give 100%, and they will try and win or score as many points as they can in that Grand Prix. But of course, the whole atmosphere will be lost if you don't have your crowd there. And we just don't have enough time to get into the rights and wrongs as to whether that makes any sense, having no crowd at all, or how you decide what crowd is allowed to go. But quite clearly, governments and countries and organizations are having to use some science and some judgment calls, and sometimes just make it up as they're going along to try and find what is the right way to enable us to at least get live sport back on screen, and then delivering that to a fan base, and then we'll see where we get to in terms of getting in front of a live audience thereafter.
And a final question to you, DC, is what do you think we'll all take away from this experience when we come out the other side, be that in 2021 or maybe even sooner, hopefully? But what do you think the big takeaway will be for you from the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, that's a very good question, Mark, of which I don't have a very good answer, I'm afraid to tell you, because what I actually think is it changes depending on what I'm doing in any given day. Some of those days it's about health and well-being, investment in my heart and lungs. My body was a big part of my professional career, and over the last decade or more of retirement, it's become a secondary thought process. But what I have learned, having more time, is just how much better I feel by banking the exercise in the morning and taking time for that moment. Whereas, as we all know, business takes over and you prioritize business. So I think health and well-being is an incredibly important lesson for me, despite the fact that I was always healthy. And I think this is something companies should really embrace. It's not about whether someone's at the desk, whether they're actually working. It's about how productive people are on any given day. So I think that we'll change the way we gauge how our employees, how our workforce are actually delivering for us. Because some people work quickly and deliver a higher standard. Some people work more slowly and deliver a high standard. So I think, I don't want to dehumanize the importance of the team and the individuals, but we're all different animals within the human race. And I think it's important that we don't try and squeeze us all into one way of working. I think having the flexibility has been something I've learned, in that maybe I don't have to travel to every single meeting, where before I felt I had to physically be present to show people I was committed. Well, I think that we've all learned it's about being there when it really matters, and it's about being there when the big decisions have to be made or the apologies have to be made, whatever it is in your challenge of business.
Well, David, as ever, thank you very much for your contribution. And it's been a pleasure for the two of us to be part of this, the Recovery Summit. We hope to see you all face-to-face, hopefully soon, and perhaps have the opportunity to share further insights and to talk to your organisations. In the meantime, it falls to me to thank you for spending these few minutes with us, to wish you well, and to hope that you can stay safe.